probably can't see it either. Yep, I can. Okay, so hopefully things will get working. I'm here with Zenith. We'll just wait a minute and make sure that everything's up and happening. Should be able to see our video coming up. It's a beautiful but cool winter's evening. So I think I'm going to overheat a little bit. We've got the nice fire at the back. If anybody in the chat can tell me, I'm trying to get to the chat window. Not quite sure how I do that. No, I've just gone where I didn't want to go. So I'm not actually sure if I'm live at the moment. We should be. Saw Kashala there for a moment, so I'm having technical issues. Sorry, I'm having technical issues here. I think we're live, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm going to refresh. Here we go. I've refreshed. And yes, we are live, so that's a good thing. And Carmen's told me, hey Carmen, nice to see you. Ray's there. Ray's here. We love you, Ray. Zenith, you love Ray. Absolutely. Brent, Peter Lennon, yes, the orchid is real. I'll actually talk about the orchid. So we are live. We're ready to go. Zenith, it is lovely to have you here. Really lovely to have you here. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional elders of this land, the Ruckwald people of the Bundjalung Nation. And I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's great to get comments and see who we've got here. And if you've got questions, put them through and hopefully we'll answer them as we go. And I'm very happy to be here with Zenith. I don't know how long I have known you, Zenith. I think it's probably around 10 to 15 years at least. And I would put you as a person who I probably met just around the place and then became friends with and then, you know, basically in a nice, really nice way fell in love with and grew to respect more and more and more. And I'm very, very happy that you've come and joined us tonight. And I do like to start these live events with a little check-in. So Zenith, I'll hand over to you if you want to give us a check-in.
Thanks, Anna. Well, thanks for cooking dinner. Thanks for making the fire. I just also really want to honour the suffering and the survival of all the Indigenous people of Australia and elsewhere in all other lands. And the fact that they're still going, I think that really speaks to endurance and tenacity. So here we are. We're going to talk about death and dying, and loss, ceremony, rites of passage, growth, about love transforming into different emotions, especially when we lose someone that we really love and someone who's close to us, and all the complexity of living well and dying well. And as a check-in, I'm really great, thanks.
Thank you, Zenith. I'm excited and nervous about tonight, and it's very real for me. My beautiful mother died a month ago, passed away a month ago in Melbourne, and I was very blessed that I got to go and spend a month with her, holding her hand in the hospital before she passed away, and to be there with her when she did. And Peter, who's on the call, asked if this orchid is real. And yes, the orchid is real, and I've put it here because my mum's favourite flowers were orchids. And actually this actual orchid was in my mother's hospital room for the last month of her life. It was a present from my partner Katrina, and I brought it up here. So this orchid was actually there with my mother and was there when she passed and with us. So it's nice to have that here. And my check-in is that I'm still very much in the process with all sorts of emotions going around. And even in our discussion over dinner, which I was very happy to cook you. And Zenith, by the way, bought me flowers. So thank you for bringing me the flowers, Zenith. My favourite flowers, sunflowers. I was very happy about that. But even just talking with you and hearing, that emotions and different emotions, it's not just about grief. And I know it's not just about grief. And hearing from you describing all the different things and emotions that come up is fabulous. And when I asked you in terms of what you what you aspire to in this work or what you do, and you said to me it's about supporting people to die well and to have a healthier bereavement. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what does that mean for you, and you may have some stories you want to share with us, but I'll hand the talking stick over to you, and we'd love to hear about some of your experience and knowledge in this area.
Okay, so I have to say straight off, I find the talking stick sort of hilarious, so just going to try and go with that. It reminds me of a sort of chair leg. So what I'd also like to do is acknowledge everyone who's tuning in and listening, or who might listen to this in the future, and just honour all those people that you bring with you, all your loved ones who've died or are dying now. And, for Arne, and I just really invite you to let those people be here with you in your hearts or in the room in a spirit form, however it works for you. But we always come with those closest to us. We're never really alone, and I think Indigenous have that really well. They always come as a we, but we often come as an I. So it's nice to really acknowledge that we're always surrounded, and the people that we love are always there with us in our hearts or in whatever form we feel that they're there with us. So I've spent the last 25 years working with people who are dying and people who are bereaved, either suddenly or because that death was expected, and those that are left behind. And death's been an incredible teacher. And I can't imagine what I would have done with my life if I hadn't said yes when death offered itself to me. And now I spend most of the time responding to people on the telephone or at the kitchen table, at the bedside, also offering ceremony for people. And now I teach. Most of the time I'm travelling and teaching, but we're both here because our teaching has not involving any travelling at the moment. And what I see really is everyone has the inherent capacity to do death well. And I see incredible courage and capability in people facing up to their death and also accompanying those that they love in their death. And all I'm doing is bringing my familiarity with that experience to assist people. I'm there as a community resource when people are floundering in a choppy sea. I'm a bit like a life raft for people to just have respite care with for a moment and then go back into that experience. Or if someone dies suddenly, and especially if someone kills themselves or they're killed in an accident or something, especially if they're young, then people often just They just need a touchstone to hang on to for a moment to assist them during that experience. But really what I'm trying to do is assist people to do as much as they can themselves and to see that they have that capacity, because the payoff for that later is so great. Because if someone does something for you, then often you don't learn to use those muscles, to use those skills, to develop that. But when people really participating as much as they can all the way through that process. When they get to the end part, like where you are, people feel satisfied. They feel they've honoured that person the very best they can. And they're grown by that experience in some way. And, it's an endless learning. And then you become a resource for others. So because you're able to sit with that experience and be with others who are in the rawness of their pain in a comfortable way. And so really it's about familiarity rather than expertise, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so I've just been through the experience, and having worked as a doctor for 25 years, I was around a lot of death. I was an emergency medicine doctor and saw people die from accidents, and I also did work in home care and assisting people to die at home. And one of the things that I really came to see is that death could be done well, and death could be done really, really badly. And definitely going through the experience with my mother, where it was probably a mix. There were lots of really beautiful things that happened, but her last month was in hospital, and the doctors were incredibly caring, but the emphasis was on definitely keeping her going, and there was very little on the death process. We certainly didn't have anybody there supporting us and with familiarity of death, as you're describing. So can you tell us a little bit more about just some of the experiences there and some of the lessons around, you said to me before how important it is that people are doing it themselves, that it's their process when they die. I'm just interested in any other insights you have there.
So I'd probably start by saying that for me, my learning is that, death's an inside job. So you can have a beautiful surround, you can have great care, you can have a beautiful view, you can be at home or in hospital. But really, if you're fearful on the inside, if you're contracting with fear and dread, then that experience is not going to be the best it can be. But if you, and I suppose it's something that you have to do, is best done in the fullness of life. So if you live well, you'll probably die well. And so living well is not just about what you accumulate or what you achieve. It's really about that inner journey. It's about the meaning of life. It's about experiencing rites of passage and what they offer you, and having deep friendship and communication and experience with people. It's about loving well, and it's about feeling a whole range of emotions. And so what I see is that when people set a place for death at the table, or let it accompany them throughout their whole life, and every now and again I think, wow, life's going really well, but I could die at any moment. I could be dead tomorrow. And that really gives me a bearing all the time to live the very best life I can, and to appreciate the rough with the smooth. And that life offers you challenges, it offers you successes, it offers you failures, and that's a rich life. And so what I see with people who do death well, whatever that is for them, is generally they're expanding. They're appreciating what's coming. They're trying to be as gracious and as generous as they can in that experience and take people with them. And they're able to see the people, the sorrow and the sadness of the people around them, but they stay on track. And while their job is not to look after their family, it's to be, in it with them. But then there comes a time where they start to disappear. And what I see is that people lose that interest, even in their family, even in their children, because they're busy pulling in order to leave that body. So most people believe that when we die, something leaves the body that brings us comfort, to think that that person's essence, consciousness, spirit lives on. The body dies, but something lives on. And that something may rejoin those that have gone before. It may hang out around and look after us. It may be there for us to connect to. It may govern the weather. Often people say, oh, that's Mum making it a beautiful day. So it's really about appreciating all the time that we can die at any moment, and about finishing off our business. So not feeling that things are unfinished between people. And there's a whole lot of things that are involved in it. And they're different things for different people depending on their lives. But really, it's really something worth cultivating and looking at in the fullness of life and ongoingly, because we all know you're lucky to live a long time and be old. A lot of people are dying, as teenagers, as young people, as middle-aged people, and death can come suddenly or expectedly. But it's something that we really, even if we follow a traditional faith and that brings us comfort, great. If we believe in nature and regeneration, great. Whatever it is that gets you there. But it's the greatest gift that you can give to those that love you, to do death well, whatever that looks like for you.
Mm. Wow, there's so much there. We could actually stay here for a couple of days, I reckon, at least, very easily. But I want to make a comment on a couple of things that you said about the not being afraid. And when my mother was in hospital, she said to me at one stage, am I dying? Do you think I'm dying, Arne? And I said to her, yes, Mama, I do. I think you probably are. And she said to me, I'm not afraid. And that really came through when you said it about, I don't think she wanted to die and she would have been happy to live on, but she was very clear in that moment that she was not afraid.
And how did that make you feel?
How did it make me feel? Look, I had a pretty consistent feeling of love for my mother the entire time she was in hospital. And it just increased my love. She was very beautiful in the hospital, and I noticed as she was slipping away, she kind of became more clear as well. The things that she said were spot on. So that's an interesting thing, and I'm still processing and understanding a lot of things, but that really came up for me when you said about the being afraid and not. And the other thing, once again, having worked in hospitals, I saw people who were, my mother was 89 years old and she'd had a full life and lived well, and many things had happened. And I saw many people in hospital who, for the last 4 to 6 weeks were on a drip and were being fed and were unconscious and all of those things. And then when they died, there was this great outpouring of grief and, oh no, they've died. And previously the family had been saying, keep them alive at any, just keep them alive. And I always found that distressing. And then I also, when I worked in home deaths, and I remember... And this included young people with cancer and things like that. And when I was able to support someone and involved with someone who died at home, surrounded by their loved ones, having been through their whole process, and when they took their last breath, the only time I have felt the feeling that was there in the room was when a baby was born. It remains to me the most love I've ever felt in a space is when I have been fortunate enough to be there with people who have died well, as you describe. And then I learnt that midwives, a true midwife, looks after babies being born and people dying, and that sort of that midpoint as one coming in or going out, but it's the cycle. And I got a lot more clarity on and had a lot more time thinking about that during this period with my mother. And I'm also interested in what you said about a healthier bereavement. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, or what you mean when you say that, Zenith?
So what happens at the moment is media and literature and a lot of things refer to grief and the grieving process. But I would say that grief is an aspect of bereavement. And because some people are happy when someone dies, some people are relieved when someone dies because their suffering is over, even when that is a sudden death, and even when that's someone who's killed themselves and it's come as a shock. But people are still relieved if they've been suffering. So there are a range of responses we can have to loss, and grief is one of those, but joy is also one of those. And joy is spontaneously arising. You can't make joy. It just has to arise. A bit like when you see an old friend in the street and something, you don't have to think, there's so-and-so. Something arises, and sometimes that happens with someone in your community that you don't even know, but every time you see them, joy arises. And sometimes it's someone you love, a good dear friend. And so I see it on a spectrum, like everything has a spectrum. And so at one end of that is joy, and at the other end is sort of grief. And in the midpoint is sadness. So when someone dies, most people are sad. So I think I've come to see that sadness is the default position. It's the default response to loss. Because people are either sad that that person is gone, they're sad, even if they're a grandparent and they're elderly, they're sad that they won't be there for their grandchildren. There's a range of things. And from there, people can swing to, a range of different feelings. But for me now, when someone dies, what happens is I hear that news, I feel that shock, I feel the emotions arise. I generally cry sometimes. And last year, a really close friend of mine died. She killed herself, and I howled. I had a whole coherent conversation with her wife, and then I put the phone down and I howled. I felt that to my fullest. And then I sort of went to joy that she was free. And that's what familiarity can do. It gets you wherever you need to go quicker. And for some people, they'll go deep. It will trigger a grief response, and they'll go into sadness, then they'll go into sorrow, they may go into despair and distress and anguish. But the more familiar you become, the more you can recognize the fine quality of the emotions, not just one big blanket, like a big grey army blanket that says grief. You want to feel the fineness of those emotions and appreciate that whatever they are, they're generally love transformed. So that love may be for the person, or it may be for yourself. If that person has been cruel to you, then there's a sadness that they weren't the parent that you wanted them to be, or they weren't that their life has been cut short, if that's how you feel. So, it's a much broader palette than just grief, and really encourage people, and that response will be different for each death because the equation is different. So it's usually something like who the person is and how they die, who you are and your relationship to them, and your familiarity with death so far will give you a response. So if it's someone close to you that you love, then the response will be much more intense. Whereas if it's a neighbour who you don't know very well, that response will be much more mild. So it's not all the same.
I I feel like in many ways I have had a familiarity with death, having been a doctor. However, there's a big difference having a familiarity with death, in a doctor role, as opposed to having a familiarity with death from a first-degree relative, which I've never had. And so this experience for me has been completely different. And I intentionally said, the doctors wanted to tell me all the medical things that were going on with Mum, because they knew I was a doctor. And I said, actually, I don't want to know the medical things, all the levels of electrolytes and things. I just want to be her son. That came up strongly for me. And I have definitely had many more feelings than grief and sadness. And they're still going on, and I definitely don't have control over them. Sometimes I'll just start crying, and sometimes, I've belly laughed at certain things harder than I had for a long time, and I've been back at home now for a couple of weeks, and I feel quite unstable in myself, partly because I'm still in the process, mainly I would say because I'm still in the process, and I feel like I'm a different person now, and we'll maybe talk about that a bit later, but I definitely don't have control over the emotions, and it was very good to hear you speaking about the range and all the different emotions. And I'd like, to hear you talk about, because you spoke about the connection with love and the emotion there. If you could tell us a bit more about that.
Well, what I've learned now is that really all those emotions are just love transformed. So they transform. Love is the overlay to most things, and it transforms into different emotions in response to that experience, the same as it can transform into fear. So as a parent, our love for small children often transforms into fear, and then for teenagers it's different. So you just have to be in it till it's done with you. You can't do that process. That process is doing you, because it can take you by surprise at any moment. And children are a great teacher in response to death, because they will be crying one moment and then they'll be out playing the next, even when that's often their parent may have died, and people are fussing around them and want them to make sure they're okay. But often, they'll be sad with you, or they'll be missing their parent for a while, but then you want them to be normal children, happy children. So you want them to go off and play with their friends. You want them to have a sleepover, even though you want to hold them close. So it's a really tricky experience, but you have to respond to whatever's happening in that moment. You can't set a plan. You can't know how it's going to be each day. And it's doing you. And, you're in you see new aspects of yourself. But also for you to be 56 and never experience the loss of someone that close, whereas most people have had that experience before. And so it's a bit like getting chickenpox as an adult. When you're a kid, you can sort of cruise through it a bit more, and then as teenagers. But, it's a blessing and a curse to have a parent live that long in a way. So.
Yes, and that you talked about familiarity a couple of times, and a number of times, and I've definitely found that when I talk to people, the people who have been through, who have lost a parent or someone close to them, have a completely different understanding from the people who haven't. And I'm quite astonished on a personal level, the depth of the experience that is much greater than just my mother dying. So there's the all the emotions that come up around her, but I've also been very surprised that there's a whole other range of emotions and feelings. For example, that I have felt like I've had some structure around me my whole life that I wasn't even necessarily aware of, But now with Mum passing, it's like that structure is now in tatters. It's still there because my father is still alive, but I feel like, and he's 90, and it's definitely completely changed. And I feel like even the sensation of that I now no longer have anywhere I can be a child. I used to go 3 months ago just before COVID, I would go home, Mum would cook dinner, Dad would tell me what I should be doing with my life, and nothing had changed since I was 12 years old. And now that is no longer there. My mother won't be cooking me dinner anymore, and my father is now at home after 62 years of marriage on his own, and I'm looking after him. So I can't be that child anymore. And, things like that I hadn't expected to happen, and that it requires me to step up in a whole way and, be looking after my father. That was a big surprise. Maybe I knew it intellectually, but the feeling around that was enormous. I don't know if you have comments about that. But I would like to talk a bit about the idea of rites of passage. And Zenith, you did our leadership training a few years ago, and it was great having you there. And the people who were on that training will never forget the fact that you were there, which is a beautiful part of your personality, that you impact in such a great way on people when you are with them. And one of my strong beliefs around rites of passage is that we're all on a staircase of life, and we keep progressively moving up that staircase, and that rites of passage, what they do is they move us up the staircase. And, whether we're a child or a teenager, or a young adult, or a grown-up, or an elder, or someone who's, close to dying, there are all these different levels. And death so clearly has the stages of a rite of passage in it. And I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on that, first of all.
I think I probably feel sort of the opposite. The rites of passage take us deeper into ourselves, and we find deeper levels of being a human being, of awareness, and rather than an external experience, it's a totally internal experience. And I say that, from becoming a mother, from becoming a grandmother, from, living a full life, of accompanying so many people in their dying and in their loss and bereavement, and also in their joy of marrying everybody as a rite of passage, and ceremonies to create family, to welcome children into that family. And, death is a great teacher, and it's unchangeable. So it's unlike marriage, which you can change, you can step out of it. Divorce, you can do that, you can grow older or not. But there's something about death that can offer you one of the biggest expansions. And I think sex is a great practice for dying. That's random. But I think that, the human body is so amazing, and there's some research somewhere that says when people are dying, when the body knows it's dying, it releases endorphins to allow that experience to be the very best and transformative that it can. And often people will say that when they're in the room with someone who's dying, that when that person does die, the room can fill with an energy, or they felt that person. People have it where someone dies halfway around the world, and someone wakes up and feels they're in the room with them. So it's sort of the great mystery that no one really knows what happens. There's lots of speculation, lots of research, and I love it that it's still a mystery, and that in the last maybe 10 years, I've just fallen more and more in love with that mystery, And I can see that that is polishing me into not having to know the answers, not having to even formulate the questions. And what I see in a lot of people who are opening to that experience, and they are learning the whole time, and they're having, revelations in their dying. And some people, a lot of people don't want to die. They're leaving behind a partner that they love, children that they love, especially young children when someone's in middle age. And they know that those children are going to live a long time without them in their lives. And some people choose to really fill those people up, that they're with what it means to die well, because that can sustain people. Whenever you think back on that memory, you can think, wow, that was such a wonderful experience with my mum, with my dad, with my partner. And the human condition is so amazing that we can learn to see the best in a lot of things. We can see the gifts in things, even when it's really painful. And we can survive things that we never thought we would. And people are also so capable that, for example, maybe washing someone's body after they've died, people will say, oh, I don't think I can do that. And then within half an hour, with a bit of encouragement, a bit of accompanying, a bit of explanation, a bit of support, there they are, they're washing that person, they're talking to that body, they're talking to that spirit, and they're in their process. But the more you participate at whatever level, without being forced to do that, generally the quicker you can move through those stages and savor them. But as long as you keep moving, whatever that is, that you're not getting stuck somewhere and going round in a circle with wanting something to be some other way. Not sure if that answers that question, but that's
all right. That's completely fine. I was very interested in the whole transformational process, and where obviously my mother transformed from, the earthly world to whatever is next. Seeing the transformations that happened to everyone around her. So my father, who's been married to my mother for 62 years, is now living at home on his own. And the transformation in him from a man who was always strong, authoritarian, pretty grumpy, difficult, to be honest. And he has turned into a cuddly bear. And I had more hugs and cuddles with him in 2 weeks than I had in my entire life. And he's listening to people, and he's apologised to people. And he said, can you help me become a more sensitive man? And he's, not a spiritual or religious man in the slightest, actually the opposite. But he's been writing a letter to my mother every night. And he's been ringing me up every day, and he never rings me up. And that's been extraordinary. And I see it also, my mother was very much she was a matriarch of the family, and I see how, that others are now stepping up towards that role. And I see in my own sons how they've transformed and are stepping to a new level in the family. And for me and my brother and my sister, how we're all transformed by this. And when I look at the elements of a rite of passage, which involve a separation, a transformation, and then a reintegration into a new way of being, I see so clearly that all those stages are there. My mother really separated during the death process, definitely transformed and is reintegrated into a new place. But for all of us as well, it has had those elements. And then within the elements of a transformation in a rite of passage, one of the key elements is the sharing of stories. And there were so many stories shared during that time of Mum's passing. And afterwards, when we all came together, and I actually sat at home with Dad for a week. We did a process called Sitting Shiva, where we sat at home for a week and people came and visited and basically shared stories of their experience with Mum. And that was extraordinary, from Mum's old friends who I knew 40 years ago to friends of mine from primary school remembering Mum cooking them food and how she was, to all sorts of different people who came in. There were so many stories. And there are definitely the challenges, which is always a part of a transformation in a rite of passage, was definitely there in many ways. And then the vision for the future and how it's going to be, which I think we're still very much in and working out. And I definitely haven't integrated yet. I definitely haven't quite landed as to where I will be after this process. But it's been, very interesting for me to see how the rites of passage elements come into this. And then some of the things that I probably talk about a bit less is that, the community building and the regenerative side of a rite of passage. They talk about rites of passage being regenerative, and I so clearly saw that in Mum's passing there was so much regeneration. My sons got to meet their cousins who they hadn't met before and became great friends, and all these people who we hadn't seen for so long came around and we had beautiful times together. And my dad was regenerated, and so many beautiful things happened at the same time as there was the sadness and the grief and all these other processes happening. So that's actually been quite an extraordinary experience for me. And in the same way as I didn't want to be a doctor, I didn't want to be a rite of passage facilitator during the process. And I said, I just want to be here as a son. And now, as I move along, I'm able to look at it and go, wow, this has been, for me, one of the most extraordinary rites of passage of my life.
Mm. Great. And that's, it's great to get what it has to offer in the fullness of it, the good and the challenging. But what's happening right now is because we're in a time of COVID. And so a lot of people are not able to have what they deem to be the traditional or accepted rite of passage when someone they love dies. So people are not being able to gather and have ceremony like they've used to, because in those ceremonies is often the sharing of stories and memories and tributes and honouring to the person that's died. And so those people are not being able to tell those stories, which is good for them, but also it makes them feel that they are honouring that person. And a lot of the magic that happens in what we see as ceremony, the subtle magic that's happening whilst we're involved in the obvious, that we're, of gathering together and of going through that process of the ceremony. So it's a very difficult time right now for a lot of people without that ceremony. And what I've been in a big meeting today with some other people, and what they're saying and what we're seeing is that some of the funeral companies are offering longer vigil so that they're opening up their premises so people can come and be with the body of the person that they love for longer, whilst meeting the COVID requirements. Or sometimes people are driving the hearse on a trip around the local streets, and people are just coming out and lining the streets and, waving and calling out to the hearse and throwing flowers, so that at least they feel some connection if they cannot go to that ceremony because of the limited numbers or because there's a total restriction altogether. So I think it's really important that if you can't have the sort of things that we're used to, that you work out what your needs are and create something that meets those needs in a difficult time. And once a year, as you know, I offer a ceremony called the Day of the Dead ceremony, which is a community gathering once a year. Anyone can come and honour their own dead. And so we make a shrine together. People put up their photos and the names of their people. I offer the ceremony, and at the end people come to the microphone like this and they say the name of their person. And last year many people came to that ceremony who hadn't been able to go to the funerals of the people because they were in the wrong country, or they couldn't get there, or they couldn't travel, or they had something else going on that they couldn't change. And I really saw how beneficial it was for them to come to any ceremony as a rite of passage, and the difference for them at the end of that ceremony, even though it wasn't specifically for that person. And so if anybody's listening and they're in the loss of not having a ceremony, then to create one for yourselves, even if it's a small thing on your own, with a candle, with a fire, with some flowers. Write a letter to the person, speak it out loud, maybe gather a small 3 or 4 people. Do whatever you need to do, but a good ceremony is sort of worth 12 months of therapy. So you're much better to try and create and feel the profoundness. Everything's sacred, so everything is sacred. But ceremonies take you into the profound, and a bit like what you're saying about death and birth, you're touching the profound. It's sort of like licking your finger and putting it into an electric socket. Things become much more precious. You see things more clearly. You feel things more deeply. You can go leaps and bounds into understanding of things that you weren't aware of before. Everything becomes sharper, and rites of passage, as even if you don't do ceremony, you are still in a rite of passage in your own internal world, with the change from being someone who moves up that ladder that you're talking about. Because once your parents die, everyone takes a step closer to that. I see it more like a high diving board, and everyone's taking their step along that diving board, and then as the people dive off or drop off or try and cling on, then everyone's moving up. And it's a beautiful thing if someone does that and takes you along in that journey, and their death is gentle, regardless of the external, but in their inner world. And I think one of the greatest gifts you have to give is to be prepared to die, and to die as well as you can, so that the people that you leave behind don't hurt so much and get the benefit from it.
Thank you, Zenith. And ceremony, can we quote you that a good ceremony is worth 12 months of, what did you say, therapy? Yeah. You heard it from Zenith. A good ceremony is worth 12 months of ceremony. And actually, I couldn't agree more. And I've had a number of ceremonies from my mother. I'm especially in my work, but personally I'm a big advocate for ceremony, and whether it's with people or on my own. And when I got back here, I had a fire and had some food outside, and I actually talked to Mum, and then I talked to Dad, and it turned into actually a ceremony of talking to the whole family. And I hadn't expected that. I thought I was just going to say a few words to Mum, but it actually became something much bigger, and I had some really profound insights around, because one of Mum's biggest things that she said before she died was, keep the family together. I want the family to be together. I want you to, support each other, and love each other and be with each other. And that was her biggest message to us: keep the family together. And when I was sitting in the ceremony, that really came out to me, and I actually had a discussion with all the members of my family about how I would like to be with them, and it was very profound and very important for me, and definitely worth at least 12 months of therapy. So thank you for that. And also I love and I thank you for naming that the ceremony and so much of it is actually about honouring the person, because the other part of the transformation in the middle stage of a rite of passage, which is the transformation, has story, challenge, a vision, and an honouring of the person. And it is a critical part. So I didn't mention that, and thank you for bringing that into the conversation. And how important that is. Now, we have a few minutes left, and it would be lovely if anybody has any questions that we could try and answer them, or have a go at them or play with them. So if you have any questions, I think they'll come up on my comments here. We'll see how we go. But while we... You can't even read it. I can just read it. But while we're waiting to see if any questions come up, Zenith, it would be great to hear from you what you're doing at the moment, how people can get involved, how they can learn more, what's on offer, anything you want to share about what you're doing, or resources that are available for people. That'd be fantastic.
Well, I think one of the greatest things you can do for yourself is to start to explore how you feel about dying, and start to make that preparation and have those conversations with the people that you love. And one of the best times to have that is driving in the car or on the telephone. A lot of people feel you have to have it face to face, eye to eye, in the flesh. But actually, it can be really supportive to have that conversation in your own home, on the telephone, whilst you're surrounded by your own familiar things that resource you into that. But a little bit of information can go a long way, especially if we die suddenly. So I know from lots of experience that when people have died suddenly, either because they've killed themselves or they've died in an accident, but they said something to someone else about what they would like, even if it's what music they would like at their funeral. But if I go to see someone who's dying and they only have enough energy to have a very short, simple conversation, then the one question that I think is the most valuable question to ask anybody is, what do you think will happen when you die? And the answer that they give, I generally share at the ceremony. And it's always something wonderful. And sometimes it's completely not what you're expecting. Like years ago, I went to see this bikie guy, and he was pretty rough and regular, in a good way. And I asked him that question, and he responded by saying that, and his family were there, his wife and children, and he said, I'm going to come back as a butterfly. And it was so unexpected. Everyone started crying. He started crying. The family started crying. You couldn't have seen, no one would have bet on that would have been his response. But when I said that at the funeral, when I'd asked him what he said, all the other guys at the funeral, who all had their black wraparound sunglasses and were a bit like this, you could see you couldn't see their eyes, but you could see the tears, and you could see those lips. And the magic of that response just went bang into everybody's hearts and just split them wide open. Now, all I'm doing is being the conduit between how he felt and sharing that with his friends, and that just made that moment completely okay. And it went a long way to soothing their, sorrow at losing him, because he was probably only in his 40s. So that would be my offering to everyone is, if you're with someone, ask them that question. But ask people who are well. Ask yourself that question and share that answer, and then keep going about other aspects of death and dying, because it can really support the people that you leave behind. And
What about your work, Zenith? Are you offering workshops or teachings at the moment?
So I'm not travelling overseas like I normally am, and I decided that I wouldn't teach online this year because so many people were offering everything online. I just wanted to have time out. And last year I had a very big year, and I'm just taking this as a gift to not be so busy. But I'm teaching I've taught in Melbourne and Byron. I'm going to teach in Sydney and Tasmania, and also up here in October and December. And then next year we'll see what comes. But I'm really hoping that they will come off face-to-face like the other two have already. Because it's the content of what I'm teaching, but it's also a transmission. It's about being in that same room. And I can do it over Zoom, but my preference is not to do that at the moment. So, but I'm talking to anybody on the telephone and in the street.
Great. Thank you. So a few questions come through, and maybe I can get a brief answer from you about a couple of them. A number of people have said, why do you think some people are so afraid of death? Some will embrace it, but some are so afraid of it. Why do you think it is that so many people are afraid of death, especially, even right at the end?
Well, I think you have to break that down and say, what aspect of death are you afraid of? Because it might be they're afraid of leaving their loved ones behind. It may be they're afraid of pain and suffering. They might be afraid of the unknown element of it. They may be afraid of the wrath of their own God. They may be afraid of a whole range of things, and you have to find out, you have to unpack it and ask them what part of that is they're afraid of. I think you can't, it's a bit like grief. It's a big blanket, and you have to find the threads that are there for that person.
Thank you. I just did a technical hitch there where I accidentally put on the recording that was coming on. Apologies for that. So one more question about the access to the deceased's body. So there's a question here from Amy about whether having access to the deceased body is a part of the rite of passage for the deceased and or the community participating, and maybe that will go a little bit into the ceremony concept there.
So my experience is absolutely that being with the body, not just viewing it, either sitting with it or being with it, with the body of that person, is absolutely beneficial to the family, and because what you see, and children see it really quickly. They say, "Oh, that's not Zenith. She's not there." They see that body is empty, that it is the physical empty shell of the person that we loved, but something, that essence, consciousness, spirit, the soul, life force, whatever we want to call it, is gone. But we are most familiar with the physical body. It's the thing that we can touch, we can hold, we can kiss, we can do it. So we're very familiar with that. But once we say it's empty, and often, you can be with someone for about 10 minutes, and because the brain has to take, especially if it's an accident and it's sudden, then by being with the person's body, you can start to see the reality of death, and that they are no longer in that body, whatever you believe in. And so it makes it easier to accept that they are gone, but especially if it's a sudden death. So the last time you saw them, they were fit and healthy and fine. They have a car accident, they're dead, and you turn up at the ceremony and you get a box with a lid on it. So it's a sort of Elvis thing, that they're not really dead, they're not really in the box. But when you see them and you can see that the body's empty, it really does. It can be a bit of a shock for some people, and it's an optional thing. You have to work out whether that's the thing for you. But my experience over and over again, over 25 years, is that people are glad they've done it. Occasionally someone says, I wish I hadn't done that. But that ratio is about 100 to 1. So...
Thank you, Zenith. Someone wrote in the comments about there's a day of dying or something. I'm not sure exactly what it was, and I can't get back to that comment to see exactly what it is, but there's something coming up which will be a resource for people who are interested.
Oh, I know. So it's probably Dying to Know Day, which is on August the 8th, and it's a national day now, and it started off by an organisation called Groundswell. So if you go to their website or Google Dying to Know Day, and so a lot of people will be putting on events in all over the country for that day, and there'll be things online, things, death cafes, there'll be available literature, people will be gathering, and so it's Dying to Know Day.
Great, thank you. Like you, Zenith, I'm also not travelling this year, which has also been a blessing. I've loved being able to stay around, and I was actually supposed to be in Europe at the moment, and that would have meant I would have either had to cancel or come back or missed my mother's passing. So it was incredibly fortunate for me that I wasn't travelling and that I can now really be here as well, which is very important. I am doing some work online. We've decided to put our leadership training as an introductory course into the framework of Rites of Passage as an online course. That's on our website, the Rites of Passage Institute. And we're running a mother and son. We had to cancel our mother and son program in a month, and so we've decided to do an online program for mothers and sons that will be available through our website and a number of other things, and I hope that people will check out our website. And also we have a Facebook page, the Rites of Passage community, and our aim is to build up a community of people who are recognising rites of passage. And often we talk about the rites of passage of children becoming young adults, but very much death is one of those rites of passage. So hopefully people will have a look at that and check it out. I know that there are more questions and we can't get to all of them, but I want to say thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Zenith. As you were talking, I was saying, I've known you a hell of a lot longer than 10, 15 years. I've known you well over 20 years, actually. I know that for a fact when I think back through it. And you have been a profound influence in this community through the marriage ceremonies, through the death ceremonies, through your unwavering commitment to speak your truth and to influence people to look at who they are and who they want to be, and on so many levels. You have been, we love Byron Bay, and we love Byron Bay because we have, one of the reasons is people like you who are change makers and leaders in the field, and your work with death and the Deathwalker programs that you do are astonishing. And then there's just the beautiful person that you are, and the fun, loving, radical, revolutionary, amazing feminist, amongst other things. So it's a treat to have you here, and for you to have joined in around the fire tonight. And I've been watching all the comments of people saying how much, just saying thank you basically, and how important this conversation is. And I hope this is one of those unfinished conversations that can go on, because it's an ongoing conversation, and certainly, for me, having just experienced what I have, I realise there's just so much more. And I'm going to give you the microphone or the talking stick for the last words tonight, and then we'll say goodnight. And this recording will be available on the timeline, and we'll post it to the Rites of Passage page and various other pages. And love the comments. And over to you, Zenith.
I don't know if I have anything else to say, but it's really been lovely to come and have you and the fire, and and for everyone who's listening and watching. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. Really. It's pretty simple, and but I would say it's very challenging at the moment. And, my thoughts are with people whose relatives and family and friends are dying at the moment, and they're unable to do what they want to do or what they need to do. And again, I say that, really go deep and create something that is going to work for you. That's the best thing I can offer at the moment. And to do it together. And to share, to get friends to support you in that. Because it's so much easier together. And that's what, that's why we're so lucky to live in such a great community, I think. Because when the chips are down, it's great friends.
Thank you and good night. And until next time, let's do this well. And let's do this together.